Grand Rising, everyone. Welcome to Anita Talks History and Genealogy. This series is about documenting the history of free persons of color, Afro-Indigenous people, and others whose lineages have been covered up, have been changed to prevent us from knowing our history. I spent over 30 years documenting my history, the history of my family, my ancestors, that was covered up. I spent over 30 years traveling, going into archives, digging up documents, listening to oral historians tell me what was going on, who I was, who my people were. And I wrote 7 books about what I uncovered. Notes and documents of free persons of color. There are 2 notes and documents of free persons of color. Then there is Pieces of the Quilt, the mosaic of an African American family. Then there is A Nation of Flaws, Just Us in the Homeland. Then there is Along the Rappahannock, the homeland of the Nanzatigo Indian Nation. And then there is Mi'kmaq, Unami, Okeechobee, and the Downriver Nations. And those are the books that I have written. And I've done numerous talks and shared my family history and my findings. At one point, I was actually a part of Ancestry and, as a genealogical researcher. And what I want to do and what I intend to do is continue to share this history and what I have found, because I not only find my people, I found our people. I found a history that had been buried of communities that lived together, of indigenous people who were enslaved even before there were Africans brought over here, and that there were not as many Africans enslaved or brought over here as they claimed. In fact, most of the people that they were enslaving were the ones that were already here in the Americas, and they were moving them around from South America up here to the United States. They were moving them to the Caribbean. Some of them were even sent to Africa. Yes, they were sending indigenous people to Africa as slaves. This is how cruel they were. And so this series, what I'm speaking on today, has to do with a free, they called it a free Negro community, and it was in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. And I want to share with you what happened on 9/11/1851. Before I do that, I want to tell you to please like, subscribe, and share. And if you have a useful comment, feel free to comment. And I appreciate it. I appreciate the support that I'm receiving, and that means that people are paying attention, and we need to pay attention. It's serious, because these people are burning books. They're burning our history, and we have to keep it alive. We have to be the ones to support the truth coming out about who our people were, and don't let them continue to bury it. So on 9/11/1851, there was an incident that took place in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and the town that the incident took place in was called Christiana. And Christiana was a town that was known to be full of abolitionists, okay? And when we hear about abolitionists these days, we hear about predominantly Quakers, white abolitionists. We don't hear a lot about free blacks who were themselves abolitionists, who were fighting for their people who were enslaved in the South. And Lancaster County was just across the line from Virginia and Maryland. And a lot of slaves escaping were coming through Lancaster County on the Underground Railroad. And there was, in Christiana, there was a brother named William Parker. And he was a part of a Negro militia that was set up to fight any persons coming over that border to capture slaves, runaway slaves. So they passed 1851. They passed a law that made it illegal for, in other words, they made it legal for these whites to chase slaves into the North. So they reversed the law, like Trump does these days. They passed a law, and the law, said that if a slave went into the North, he could not be captured. He was free. But of course, they changed that law, and it's called the Fugitive Slave Act. Okay, and when they changed that law, Frederick Douglass was going around, and he was meeting in towns where there were free blacks and telling them that they should stand up and fight, regardless of what laws were passed. They needed to fight, to help the slaves who were fleeing, to help them get north, go further north, go into Canada. And so Lancaster, the free blacks who lived in Lancaster County, in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and Christiana, formed a militia. And they called it the Negro Mutual Association or something like that. But, to give it a more legal sound, they weren't going to call it the Negro Militia. They called it. They were meeting, and their mission was to do anything possible or anything necessary to stop these people who were hunting down slaves. And William Parker was one of he was the main person. He lived in Christiana, and he was a free black who had come north. He was married, he had a wife, Elizabeth, and as part of the Negro Mutual Association, they would go, they would have their meetings, but at night they spread out, and they heard about, these slave catchers coming over the border. They went after them, and some of them did not make it out alive. I'm serious. These brothers were serious. There was a place where my ancestor, Henry Green, who was part of that militia, lived. And any slave that came up there was safe, because the whites were afraid to go up in the Welsh Mountains where Henry Green lived. They did not play. So on this day, there was a Gorsuch. This man's name was Gorsuch, and he was a slave owner. Dickinson Gorsuch was his son, and they came across the line from Maryland. He was a slave owner in Maryland, and I think his name was Edward Gorsuch or something like that. But anyway, Edgar. But he came across the border looking for a slave, looking for his slaves. And he went on this morning, and he was banging on William Parker's door. And William Parker, he had some slaves there that were getting ready to go on the road. He was part of the Underground Railroad. That was his house. He was part of the Underground Railroad. And he has sworn to give his life for those slaves. just like everyone else that was part of that Negro militia in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. So Gorsuch and his son, Edgar and Dickinson Gorsuch, went and, Gorsuch was banging on his doors talking about, oh, give me my slaves, give me my slaves. And William Parker opened the door and looked at him and said, there ain't no slaves in here. What do you want? Get away from my door. And behind Gorsuch, besides his son, there was federal marshals. They had deputized any old white male they could find. So they had a militia themselves. They had a marshal. All these marshals were nothing but militia, because they deputized any white man that agreed to do, what they wanted them to do, just like Trump is doing right now. And so this militia that was standing outside of William Parker's door, didn't mean nothing to William, because he said, you got to get away from my door. There ain't nobody here. There ain't no slaves up in here. Get away from the door. And he kept telling him to get away from the door. And Gorsuch tried to push his way past William Parker. And William Parker shot him through the chest. And he hit the ground, and they said he was dead before he hit the ground. So chaos ensued, but not the kind you think, because all the militias turned around. They were surrounded by a sea of black faces. And those black faces, those black men, began whipping those white militiamen. They came after them. And the white men were running, and guess what? The white men had guns, but the Negroes only had farming tools, and that's what they were coming at them with, not weapons, farming tools. They were all part of that the Negro Mutual Association, or whatever they have formed. And so, of course, the brave men of the federal marshals ran once they were faced with, with black folks that were willing to stand up and fight back. They ran. And the reason that they had shown up is that Elizabeth, who was up in the attic with the escaped slaves, protecting them, had blown a French horn out the window. And that was to tell all those members of that Negro militia that one of their own was being threatened. And that's how they showed up so fast. And they showed up silently and surrounded the white federal marshals and their deputies, or whatever they were. Anyway, so they ran. And when they scattered, they ran. And then as they were, so they were clear. So they got William and his family out of the house and the slaves. And they put them, and William and the slaves got on Underground Railroad. And I believe Elizabeth did too, or she went to a safe house something, because they were going to be after William. He was the one that killed the white man. So what they did was help the slaves escape into all the way up on the Underground Railroad, which led over the mountains and up into New York and into Canada. So William Parker himself and the slaves all went into Canada. And the next day, the federal marshals came back and charged 38 of the men in the community with treason, including my my ancestors and some of our other relatives that were there, that were part of the men. And they arrested them and stuck them in pens. And some of them, they just arrested. I think they were arresting a lot of any colored or black man they saw. They were arresting. Okay. And there was like 38 of them that went on trial, including my great-great-grandfather, Henry Green. So my book, Minkwa Onamioki Hoki and the Downriver Nations, is about Henry Green, and it's about the Christiana resistance, or the Bloody Dawn. There's a couple of books, Bloody Dawn and Christiana Resistance. And Henry Green and several of the men from the community were put on trial. And Abraham Lincoln's friend, his name was Stevenson. He was an attorney, and he was Abraham Lincoln's right-hand man, and he defended them. He was their attorney. He was an abolitionist, by the way. So there were a lot of white abolitionists who came up on the scene, after it took place. But most of the abolitionists that were in Lancaster County that were Quakers did not believe in violence. So they did not believe in fighting back. So they were not going to join the fight against the militia. They were just there to witness. Okay. So Thaddeus Stevens, he's the one. He himself was involved with a mulatto woman, a free Negro woman. And they had a long-term relationship. And he defended all the men that were arrested. That there were 38 men arrested. They kept them in the county jail or somewhere for 2 years. By the time the trial came up and Thaddeus went to court, the court was in Philadelphia. So this is Lancaster. The men had to go to Philadelphia to be tried. And it was a federal trial because they were charged with treason. And Thaddeus Stevens told them, I want you to all dress up the same. You're going to put I think that he said a white shirt and black pants, and put your hair a certain way. He told them how to wear their hair. They all had to have the same hairstyle. So they go to federal court. And the whites could not identify them. The marshals that they had deputized couldn't identify them. And the case was dismissed. They were found not guilty. And they went home. And that is what true story. And you would think it would be in the history books, but of course it's not, because it's against slavery. It's saying that there were people, free blacks, as they were called, or free Negroes, that they were called, who were fighting for the slaves, who stood up for the slaves, who helped along the Underground Railroad to get slaves up into Canada. And this was after the Fugitive Slave Act was passed. But before that, they were doing the same thing. They were making sure that they got to the settlements in Canada. And one of the ones that I know about is called Bruxton, and it's right outside of the Onondaga Reservation, in Canada. And so this is a historical fact, and no, it's not in any books. I learned that in a history book. I learned that doing my own research. And also my ancestors, Henry Green, and my other ancestor, Uriah Martin, who lived in that region, especially Uriah, he lived in Christiana. And they were in the Civil War. Not only were they a part of the Christiana resistance, they joined the United States colored troops and were in the Civil War. And Henry Green's brother, Alfred Green, was in the 54 54th of Massachusetts, out of Lancaster. And their contributions are not, are not heralded. They are not in a history book. So that we have to tell our stories, the stories of our people that we know about. And we have to talk to people who have those stories, because a lot of older people have those stories that were told to them. My mother told me these stories, and I started writing them down. She heard them from her mother and her father. And so I started writing them down. I started researching them because I wanted to know why, when we lived right there, not far from Lancaster County, in another county, why it wasn't in our history books that there were people of color in the Civil War, in all wars, in fact. But none of that story about Bloody Dawn or the Christiana resistance was in any of the history books that I read, or that they weren't in the schools. They weren't in the colleges. None of that was told to me, when I was back there and I was in school. This is things that I myself had to research, that, each person, may have to do it for their families or their community. Like mine wound up being a community search. They wound up being, a search where I'm finding groups of people who moved together, free persons of color, but who reached back to help slaves who were part of the Underground Railroad. Like one of my ancestors, his name was Robert Penn. He was a free black born in Virginia, or free persons of color born in Virginia, who came north before the Civil War. He after the Fugitive Slave Act, because he was suspected of being a part of the Underground Railroad, he was run out of Virginia. And his son and my great uncle, Walter Samuel Penn, was in the 54th Massachusetts. So these were people who continued to do what they needed to do, not just to get themselves free, but to get their brethren free, their people free, to get their fellow human beings free. Because slavery is against anything Christian. It's against any whole, healthy religion. Anytime that you take God's creation and turn them into a machine to make money for you, there's nothing godly about that. There's nothing godly or spiritual about that. And so, I'm proud to, share that information with you all. Sometimes they actually do events about it. They'll have, on the anniversary, like 9/11, on 9/11, Christiana or Lancaster County will have something about it. But you're talking about, we're having celebrations about, Juneteenth. But that day should be a celebration as well. There are so many days where our people have done things to free ourselves and to free others. Here is a group that worked with Frederick Douglass. He was their leader. He was their inspiration to put their lives on the line to free slaves, to free their brethren whose lives were being stolen and whose labor was being stolen, whose families were being stolen, in order to enrich some lazy people who didn't want to work the ground themselves, who wanted it given to them. I'm sorry, I don't know how to make that pretty. I don't know how to make that pretty. And that's just, that is what happened. So check that out. Check out Bloody Dawn. check out the Christiana Resistance and check out Christiana, Pennsylvania. It's still there. There's still books on it besides my book, which is, again, Black Mink with the Life and Times of Henry Green. And make sure, again, that you like, subscribe, share, and comment. And I will check with you again. Have a beautiful